Kind of like when I talked about Oliver and Company before, The Fox and the Hound is another sort of dark horse of the Disney lineup I wanted to bring some justice to. It's based rather loosely on the Daniel P. Mannix novel of the same name, but there's a central and mutual shared theme that ties very differing adaptations together, that of change and what comes with accepting it. I saw the DVD re-release of this film marketed a lot on the Disney Channel and stuff as a kid, and typically they use the early, cutesier scenes to sell the movie, which is why I was never really in a hurry to watch this one, but boy, did it blow me away when I finally watched it with fresh eyes just recently. The fact that this movie opens on total solemn silence while most Disney movies have a grand overture or choir says a lot, that this story is going to be heavy and not everything here is to be sung or celebrated. The Fox and the Hound is the story of a fox cub and a newborn hunting hound who grow up as neighbors but find their natural and nurturing dispositions will, almost definitely, at some point, force them to be enemies. As both grow up, Todd realizes he has to live as a wild fox and Copper must carry out his duty as a hunting dog, and their friendship is tested against the strain caused by their owners, peers, and nature itself. I'm sure many wish they could say that the film ends with Todd and Copper resolving all their differences, Copper's trigger-happy master giving up hunting, and allowing the two to be best friends and live in peace. But the resolution of the story is far more bittersweet, as Todd and Copper come to an understanding that they have drifted in different ways, and that just because they'll live different lives and perhaps never truly reunite, doesn't mean they aren't the closest friends can be. I was so struck by the maturity of this ending, and just as much so, the importance of the message, because what's so poignant here is that I think everyone can relate to some extent to Todd and Copper's relationship. Sometimes we meet with a friend we haven't seen in years, or we just notice a gradual divide in a relationship we've nurtured for a long time. And we find that sometimes that to go one separate way doesn't mean two people can't cherish their bond, or that friendship's dormancy doesn't mean its end or importance, as Todd and Copper find that they would still need to give their lives for one another, no matter how their lives split them apart, or how their needs and desires pull them in totally different ways. The lesson I take away, and potentially I'd hope future audiences to take away from this, is that it's important and even necessary to accept change. As I write this and approach the end of my college career, I find this message more valuable than ever. The lasting image of Todd and Copper bidding one another a silent farewell was perhaps an image I really needed at the time I rewatched this for the first time. The film's main intent as sort of a microcosm exists in the form of the exploits of the comic relief characters Dinky and Boomer, who at first appear to be nearly disposable foundations of a subplot where they continually hunt a caterpillar to no success. The endeavor comes to bust when the caterpillar goes through its metamorphosis into a butterfly. And what we have here in summary is a story of two friends chasing something they want but can't have, a chase that is ended by change, just like Todd and Copper's futile attempt to recapture their friendship. Also notable is the fact that the change that ends Dinky and Boomer's fool's errand in pursuing the caterpillar is a natural change, one of metamorphosis. This in turn introduces the third factor in the concoction that rather tragically splits Todd and Copper apart. That of nature. As Todd and Copper grow, they find their needs change, as Copper finds great fulfillment as a hunter, and Todd falls in love with another fox. Outside of their upbringing, there's no reason they can stay within one another's worlds when they want such different things. As a matter of fact, one could argue that everyone in this movie functions by nature. Widow Tweed adopts Todd to relieve her loneliness, which we as people need to do. Just as Amos Slade makes his living by hunting, his only real flaw that places him as the antagonist is his temper and personal vendetta against Todd. Otherwise, he's just trying to sustain his farm and business, and it's hard to peg him as truly a bad guy. We could even take it a step further and say that the ferocious bear that forces Todd and Copper to team up one last time is exactly what's forcing them apart, a force of nature. Said bear appears pretty intrusively and for little reason, but that's how animal instinct works. And I find it super interesting how Amos Slade finds himself at the opposition of a larger and deadlier hunter than he is for the first time. And this is his undoing. Everyone operates on and is victim to nature. What breaks the cycle is when Todd denies his instinct to run away, as he risks his life to save his natural enemy, just as after the fact, Copper breaks free of his nature as a bloodhound and stops Amos from shooting his friend. The scene gives me total chills, very little is said, but everything is conveyed through a quiet but unbelievably tense moment. You couldn't cut the tension with a knife, as the faces of these exhausted characters tell a story of deciding enough is enough, and meeting a foundation of peace. Meanwhile, as the bear represents a destructive and terrifying element of nature, the positive and loving is still personified by Big Mama the Owl, who directly interacts very little with the story, but encourages following of instinct in the best ways, uniting Todd with both Tweed and Vixie, and warning him of the dangers of befriending Copper. And this brings us to our ending, where everyone has experienced some change. Tweed has to accept that Todd can't be her pet anymore, just as he can't be Copper's close friend, but that doesn't dismiss the love they feel for one another. Foreshadowed by the poem Tweed recites in the heartbreaking scene where she releases Todd into the forest, goodbye may be forever, but true love and friendship is just as much so. This is still a much lighter note than that which the book ends on, wherein Todd dies running from Copper in a chase, and Copper in turn must be shot by the character off of whom Amos Slade is based on when he cannot take the Hound into his nursing home he's urged to move into. But I feel at the very least a faithful spirit is achieved by the film's ending, showing the inevitable folly of one's destiny nearly guaranteed by their instinct and purpose, offset by the small changes made by resistance. I also want to give credit to the movie's art. The theme of nature is further reinforced by the honest and sometimes unflattering way Copper and Todd are drawn and animated when relying on animal instincts such as fighting, making the fight with the bear one of the most intense climactic sequences in a Disney movie. Word is that one of the artists on the film had a son with a pet fox that he observed for some bits, and the genuinity really shows. Disney animals are just endlessly charming, and seeing them offset by such violent action sends such a chill down my spine. Change is terrifying and even a bit depressing in the context of this movie, but there are rewards to be found in these endeavors that Big Mama bolsters: Copper's fulfillment and Todd's love. In fact, the antagonists of the film are the biggest cautionary tales in favor of embracing change. Amos Slade only finds himself in deep as he does because he so stubbornly pursues killing Todd to the point that he would resort to breaking hunting laws to chase after him. Simply letting go and accepting things that happened would have meant never encountering the bear that nearly kills him. To a lesser extent, this can be applied to Chief as well, who is jealous of Copper's prominence in their master's consideration, and in his exuberance to please Amos and refusal to accept his change in paradigm, chases Todd onto a train track, an endeavor which ends with his own grievous injury. This is all lovingly framed by the film's narrative progression through the changing of the seasons, that which controls the world and all the life inhabiting it, and encouraging it to adapt. Animals survive by adapting and following instincts, sort of subtly touched on by Boomer and Dinky's flight south for the winter. And that's why a lesson about change is so well served by animals, especially dogs. It's sort of fascinating to think about how evolution is an animal's greatest tool and most important means of survival, to adapt to new predators, prey, and weather. And yet this means pack animals, such as dogs, are paradoxically vulnerable to change, a trait that man has arguably only fanned the flame of in our continued domestication of canines, which lines up perfectly with Copper's conflicted feelings. It's Copper who's following nature and that which he is told, but feels oddly conflicted about cutting ties with Todd, just as human beings resist change even if we are aware that staying where we are can be incredibly harmful. This is what I mean when I say everyone has a story like Todd and Copper's. With all that in mind, it's easy to see why people find this film so upsetting, because sometimes you can't explain how a friend has changed or why. You just realize that you can't have the same friendship when you've grown into different people. But we're supposed to grow and adapt as our surroundings change. That's the real beauty of The Fox and the Hound, and how it's become such an emotional touchstone in my repertoire.